You're alone, enjoying the scenic view of the mountains. Suddenly, you hear footsteps approaching you, steps far too heavy to be human. You run, but no matter how fast you flee, the steps get closer to you. By the time you collapse from exhaustion, its shadow stands over you. A clawed hand drags you away through the woods, alive and too tired to move. Today's episode features an assortment of stories about monsters in the wilderness, the most disturbing kinds of ghosts, and more. Enjoy, and remember to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. And check out eeriecast.com for more free and terrifying podcasts. Now, let's begin. The Swaying Man, from Moni B Good. This is a story from my childhood. I was 11 years old when my folks bought a little house in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania. It was old and needed a lot of work before we could move into it, so we all had to pitch in. It was my mom, dad, me, and my little brother Davy, who was 8 years old. Before long, the first event happened. Davy and I were helping Mom in the kitchen one day, and Dad was peeling off layer after layer of wallpaper in the living room. He was cussing because there were so many layers. It was like they never removed a layer of it at all. They just pasted new paper over old, year after year, and never stopped in the corners either, as they'd been rounded out at this point. So Dad was frustrated and angry. We could hear him cursing when all of a sudden, boom. We all ran in to find Dad halfway between the living room floor and the basement. He fell right through the floor, and Mom quickly ran over to help pull him out. He was even more mad, but he was fine, and we all got a chuckle out of it eventually. A couple of hours went by and he was cursing again, as he felt like this wallpaper job was putting him way behind schedule. This time we heard a loud crash. As we entered the living room, Dad's face was white. He was staring at a lamp that lay in the middle of the floor, now broken. I could see fear in his face, and he looked at Mom and I, saying, I never touched it. Mom looked at the table it sat on, and then to us. She shooed us out of the room, telling us to get back to work. Davy ran off, but I stopped at the corner and peeked back in. Dad told Mom to look at the table, and I looked at it as Mom did. The dust on it was thick, and I could see that the lamp slid about 6 inches to the end of the table before then somehow hurling itself to the middle of the room. That's when I heard Dad say the words, "I'm sorry I cursed you. Please forgive me." That was my introduction to my new haunted house. It wasn't long before me and Davy started getting visited by something in the night while we slept. We both would hear heartbeats or breathing that got louder and louder until it sounded right on top of us. We had a bunk bed and shared a room for the first 2 years, so we both experienced the things I'm about to tell you. A figure would appear at the doorway of our room. It seemed to sway or swing, sometimes almost dancing. It was so weird and creepy. The sound of either heartbeat or breathing would begin, and the being would sway to the beat, moving its hand like it was going to turn on the light. But it never actually did. As it swayed, it would slowly enter the room, taking its time while approaching our bed. We always froze and would never speak when this happened. We were terrified little kids. It would approach our bed and stand there swaying, and even though we could never see its features, we both knew when it was looking at us. It would look at me, then at Davy, then sway off to the end of the bunk and stand completely still for at least an hour, never moving an inch. Eventually, it would just disappear. Of course, our parents played it off. I think so as not to encourage the fear, but my poor little brother was a mess after the first 6 months of this happening, and it seemed to happen at least twice a week. They finally bought us a nightlight to keep in our room, but it didn't stop the being from his weekly visits. It just made him stay closer to the wall, and actually looked bigger somehow. This entity never touched us, just scared the heck out of us, until it eventually ended as quickly as it started. Other things happened over the years as we got older. I would hear my name being called when no one was in the house. Davy would tell me about his toys disappearing for a few days, only to return in a place he never put them. But nothing was ever as scary as the first year in that house with our nightly visits from the Swaying Man. A cryptid crossed my path near Mount Adams. From Chewok, 79. This happened between 2003 and 2004. I'd been working for a gravel company off and on for about 1 to 2 years. My second year, I was promoted from working underneath a rock crusher, shoveling gravel, and keeping the belts clear for the rock crushing machine. It was the dirtiest job, but built character and humbled me deeply. The following year, 2004, around late summer or early fall, my boss had obtained a job up in the mountains on my res. We were crushing rock and layering it over the back roads for logging trucks. Timber is one of the main moneymakers for my tribe, aside from the Indian Casino, aka Legends Casino. But back to the job. We started in Old Maids Canyon. I had my shovel ready, but my boss told me to come with him and set the shovel down. I had been promoted to roller operator. Not only was I not working the dirtiest job I'd ever worked, but my boss gave me a $2 raise for running the roller. It took me about a week to feel comfortable operating it on my own, and I was on my own by the second day, but stuck close to the rock crusher and trucks to get more familiar with the roller. About 3 weeks into this job, I'd rolled ahead so far from the crushing site, I'd rarely see the trucks. This meant I was farther into the mountains on my own. I had a CD Walkman to listen to music and drown out the very loud roller. I was deep into Old Maids Canyon. A truck had passed me and dumped the gravel. The backhoe came in and leveled it out, and now it was my turn to pack it down with the roller. The vibration was turned on, and I put the roller into gear to move forward. The truck and backhoe were gone by then. With my headphones in, I went to work. I was at least 5, maybe 6 miles away from the crushing site. The roller runs slow regardless, so I can't necessarily kick the sucker into fifth and run out of there in a hurry. I was in an area where the canyon and tree line were butted up against the road I was rolling. The wind had picked up and blew in my direction. It was then that I picked up the stench of something that seemed like rotted meat and 7-year-strong body odor. It literally made me want to vomit. The smell was that bad. I figured maybe a dead deer or elk was nearby. I looked all around me and realized just how enclosed I was in this area. Canyon and trees surrounding me. To the left was a cliffside slightly hidden by tall tamarick trees, but I could see rock from the cliffside through the trees. I took my headphones off, pulled the roller over and shut it off. The smell had become so strong, I knew I had to be pretty close to the dead animal, or whatever was near the road. I heard rocks falling from the cliffs to the left of me. I looked over there as it caught my attention. I also heard some grunting sounds that were deep and muffled, like someone or something was trying to remain quiet, running up a hill up the cliffs. I gazed through the trees. The wind picked up again, blowing that awful stench once more towards me. I realized if I can smell this thing, then it's likely that it has definitely smelled me. I mean, it was so close I could hear it struggling to climb the cliffside. Then, through the branches, I caught a sight of a patch of fur. This was fur I'd never seen before in my entire life. The body on this thing was orange and brown in color in the sunlight, the fur covering a very muscular back. People have told me it was probably just a bear. My stepdad, whom landed this job for me and drove a truck for this company, even said it was a bear himself. But I know what I saw. After spending years on the res, I've heard stories of Speely Eye and Bigfoot, which had been spotted by many on the reservation. The thing grunted and whooped once it reached the top. I saw a good portion of it then. To my amazement and my anxiety, it looked like an ape, but primarily bipedal. The face had some fur over it, and even though this coat that covered the body was orange and brown, it had the snout of a coyote, almost dog-like. It was like if Bigfoot and a dogman were to have spliced their genes, creating an animal in their image. It would have looked like this. This thing was like 8 or 9 feet tall, too. Its eyes were a sharp yellow color and almost glowed even though it was in the daylight. It ran away then, out of my sight. What happened in those few minutes had left a huge impact on me. Realizing I was alone and miles away from people, I put the roller in reverse, backing it up and starting my way back to the crushing site. Soon the smell was gone. Everything seemed to return to normal. I might add, before it happened, I didn't realize no birds or owls or anything were around. They would usually fly past me and chirp along the trees, into their nests. I noticed this wasn't happening at all then. No one believed what I saw. I tried to tell my coworkers and my now ex-stepdad. I never ventured far from the trucks after that. If I ended up alone, my stepdad left me with a pistol to keep on me, just in case I came across a bear again. I think the reason people didn't want to believe me was because they didn't want to fear anything while working so far and deep in the mountains, near Mount Adams. I believe I saw a trickster, or speleai, and it scared me to the point that I couldn't wait for this job in the mountains to be done. Once we laid gravel on all the logging roads, I never returned to the job. My mom and stepdad ended up divorcing not long after. I was 24 at the time. The only person who believed me was my mom. Her brother, my uncle, had seen a Sasquatch while he was young. My uncle, creator bless his soul, had died tragically in a car accident when I was 9. I never got to hear his story, but he did see Bigfoot. Our mountains have creatures residing in them. Bigfoot, speleai, UFO sightings. I never thought I'd come across something like this in my lifetime. This is one of the experiences that has happened to me. I believe speleai had spared me that day. Instead of messing with me, it scurried away and grunted once at the top of the cliffs as if to say, "You're lucky I'm letting you go," before disappearing over the top of the cliffside. These areas of the entire world exist. Creatures reside in them, and we can't even begin to comprehend them. But as a Native American myself, I believe coexisting with things, even if we don't completely understand them, is a part of life. Then again, had it turned out that speleai wanted to stick around and not spare me, I wouldn't be here right now to share this story. Thanks for listening. It Watches as You Sleep. From Anonymous. It was November 2021 on a school day. I remember my friend and I were hanging out this particular morning. At the time, I was a junior at school, and things were finally back to normal after the Rona situation. I had just finished softball practice, and I had about an hour until the first period, and my friend wanted to go to Dunkin's. So I thought, why not? Little did I know this decision would change my beliefs and open my eyes. Now, Dunkin's was just across the street from my school, but my friend wanted to take a detour through the woods to hit her vape. We get to our usual spot, and I walked off the path a little to let her do her thing. I was there for a good while. That's when I heard some sort of shuffling through the leaves. Right away, I felt odd. There was something eerie about it. And it became downright unsettling when I heard someone say, "Come here." I ignored it and quickly went back to my friend. I told her we should leave and forget about Dunkin's, so we did. The day passed by, and at the end of the school day, I felt comfortable enough to go back through the woods. However, I soon regretted this. The whole way home, I kept hearing heavy footsteps behind me, like I was being followed by someone. So I began to run. As I did, I could hear breathing, and I swear at one point, I felt that breathing down my neck. I never looked back. I didn't want to see what it was. I'll admit I was scared, so that night I went to bed and I locked my bedroom door. I wasn't allowed to lock my door at night in case of emergencies, but I double-checked, and I know for sure it was locked. I felt safer. I went to sleep, but at some point in the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why, until I heard this low growl in my room. Then I nearly gagged, because I could smell something like rotting flesh. I looked around my room to see where it was coming from, and I noticed my door was wide open. Slowly, my eyes made their way to the corner of the room, and I saw this thing. Something inside told me it was the same thing that had been torturing me all day. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. How long had it been there watching me sleep? It had pale yellow eyes reflecting from what little light there was. Unblinkingly, they stared at me. It was almost touching the ceiling with how tall it was, and I could see yellow, sharp teeth as it smiled. It had this sickly-looking white, bony body. It almost looked human, but all wrong. As I looked into its eyes, I could feel my heart in my throat. Eventually, I was able to will myself into slowly getting out of bed. I walked to the door, my eyes never leaving that thing. Once I reached the doorway, I screamed and I ran to my parents' room. I explained what I saw, but when my parents ran to my room to check, it was gone. They told me I had to have been dreaming and that they would talk about it in the morning. But I know what I saw, and I know I was awake. Since then, I've never seen anything like it again, but I still have no idea what it was. I wonder why it just stood there and watched me. I know it could have killed me if it wanted to. Maybe it was some kind of forest demon that followed me home. Most of the people I share this story with say I made it up, but I wish I did. I don't care if they believe me or not. I will say, though, that I'll never be taking any shortcuts through the woods again. Occurrences from Double Spaced. These few stories are from when I lived in an old apartment complex. They span over the years I lived there from 2012 to 2021. It was located on the edge of a town in Indiana. The place was nice and bright during the day, but at night, it was an entirely different place. When I'd first moved in, nothing seemed scary at all. It was all cheerful and fun. But a year or two after that, weird things started to happen. Now, there had been a lot of small occurrences in this apartment, but this main one still doesn't make any sense. It was a cool autumn night, and I was relaxing by my computer watching a show. Earlier in the night, I had heard a few creaks from my stairs. Those stairs would creak only when someone had applied pressure onto certain steps near the top, but never by themselves. I tried not to think too much of it. I thought it was just my parents walking up to bed. Around midnight to 1 in the morning, I had been getting a feeling that I was being watched. At this time, I wasn't allowed to be up that late since I had school the next day. My dad would usually get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom as a routine. His room is also across from my hall, and he made sure to keep all the doors open in case of anything happening. So I'd been listening for the creak on the floor to indicate when he would get up. But I felt the gaze of someone or something watching me. So naturally, I turned around to see if my dad was there. But when I turned, there was nothing. Not a single light on, not a shadow. Just nothing. I turned back around, still a little freaked out, and I returned to watching my show. A few minutes later, I felt the gaze again, but instead of from my parents' room, it seemed to be coming from my doorway. So I turned the brightness down on my computer and looked at the doorway. Once again, nothing. I looked around for a second to see if I'd been imagining things, but then something caught my eye. In the corner of my room behind my door was a white mist almost hovering right behind the door. Since my bed was right next to the door, I was looking at this mist as I slowly began to spot details. It looked like a man that was in his late 50s to young 60s. He was bald and had little wrinkles, but otherwise looked pretty young for his age. This alone would have kept me quiet, but then I noticed its eyes. Its eyes were black and glazed over, almost as if in cartoons when someone would look at the sky and the stars would reflect fully off of their eyes. The eyes were filled with dread and sadness while he stared. I sat in my bed, paralyzed in fear, chills flooding over my skin in waves. I felt my heartbeat quicken. I don't know how long I stared at his face, but soon enough, it disappeared. Not in a puff of smoke, no passing out, just a blink, then it was gone. The second occurrence was a couple of months after this, so the event had been cleared from my mind mostly. It was a Saturday, so I'd been up again all night long playing on the PS3. I'd gotten up from playing to get a drink. Now you need to understand the layout a bit. The front door goes right into the living room. Then you had the TV to the left of a hallway. The hallway split into 3 ways, the first being the staircase, then a closet, and another hallway that had led to the water heater and the bathroom. I had just gotten my drink poured when I heard a random male voice whisper softly in my ear. Tom. I froze in place. Then after a few seconds, I turned around and called out to my dad. There was no reply. I then began walking around the level of the house, searching for my dad to see if he was playing a trick on me. I opened the closet right across from the bathroom, and just as I opened it, something grabbed my shoulder. I jumped, turning to face whoever it was, but again, there was nothing. The grip on my shoulder was gone. I ran up to my room, turned on the lights, and tried my best to calm down and relax. My final occurrence was on a school night. I was downstairs with my mom and my brother. My brother was playing the PS3 and my mom was cooking dinner in the kitchen. I was in the living room doing homework. At one point, I got up to put my backpack upstairs. Then, not even when I'd gotten up 2 steps, something ran down the hallway to the bathroom so fast, they'd caused a photo on the wall to slam into the floor. They opened and shut the bathroom door and locked it. My mom asked me and my brother if we ran to the bathroom, and we both said no. She even got a little freaked out, grabbing the knife she was using to cut up vegetables, then walked slowly to the bathroom. She unlocked the door from the outside, but inside the bathroom there was nothing there. Everything after this was pretty small in comparison, like the toilet flushing in the middle of the night or creaking on the stairs. The only other big event was when I was 13, hanging out with my friend from the complex. We'd been standing by these woods across from my house with our back to an open area. The complex workers had been cutting down trees, so there were tons of dead leaves and sticks to step on. My friend and I were just talking when we heard someone take a few steps in the middle of the woods to our right. Then they stepped to turn towards us. We just stopped. Then we turned our heads quickly to see nothing there. No noise of running or a person hiding, just nothing. After we moved out, recently, I asked my mom and my sister if they'd seen anything paranormal in that old house. They both admitted they had seen a man that was exactly what I described earlier. They saw him walking past their rooms to the bathroom. I tried looking up the history of the old apartment, but I never found anything significant. The Crying Boy, from Caribou, 1996. This happened 20 years ago. I was about 6 years old. I grew up in Northern California, where I was born and raised until I was 13, after which we moved to Arizona, but that's a different story. I've always been very sensitive to the supernatural, and for years I never really talked about half the things I saw as a child, mainly because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. Well, my family and I loved going to this little historic ghost town called Knight's Ferry. It does have some residents that live on the outskirts of the historic site my family and I often visited. When you first go to the site, you of course see a large parking lot, then a large modern building that is a museum of taxidermy animals. Then past that, you see the ruins of some old decaying stone building from the 1800s, along with an old power mill, wood cabin, a large river with an enclosed wooden bridge, and past all that is wide open nature and hiking trails. I grew up being told not to travel too far away on my own, maybe because rattlers could be hiding in the brush. They didn't want me to fall in the river, and also because we've heard stories of people going there to do weird cult rituals that involved animal sacrifices, and my family didn't want me stumbling upon that, especially since I couldn't handle seeing a dead animal on the side of the road without crying. Well, me being ADHD and loved going on adventures, it was a little too easy for me to stray away and get distracted. That's kind of what happened that day that I had my creepy experience. I remember that day very clearly. My school was on spring break, and it was a beautiful day, probably around 80 degrees. My oldest sister, we'll call her S, and her husband at the time, Jay, took me on a nice walk in the nature reserve of Knight's Ferry. We got pretty deep into the area. My sister was telling me about this cave in the area that had crystals in it. I don't know if she was telling the truth or just trying to mess with me, but I had an obsession with collecting rocks, so I kept an eye out for anything that looked like a cave. S and J found a spot they stopped at to look over the scenery. It was by what looked to be the ruins of a stone brick wall. I could hear the river running nearby as I looked at the brick wall, and my 6-year-old brain was thinking, I bet you this was a castle. Suddenly, I heard a child crying. I looked around and didn't see anyone at the moment, so I followed the cry. Soon I found a little boy crying by the river. I can't really remember what he was wearing, but I do remember he was a Caucasian boy with dark hair and brown eyes. He seemed to be around my age. I felt something inside me tell me to run, but of course my empathetic heart wanted to comfort him instead. I went up to him cautiously and said, "Hey, are you okay? What's wrong? Why are you crying?" The boy looked at me and said, "Me and my friend were playing ball, and the ball fell into the river. My friend went to get it, but he never came back up." The boy and I were standing about a good 8 feet away from the river. I looked at the river as the water violently rushed by, and I looked back at the boy. "Okay, I have my family nearby. Stay here. Don't move while I go get help." The boy nodded, and I went to give him a quick comfort hug. That's when I noticed something weird. It felt like I'd hugged a wet corpse. He felt extremely cold and soaked. But when I looked at him, he was perfectly dry. I felt very uneasy, almost a sense of doom. I took a quick step back, very confused, and I looked at the boy again for a second. He was staring at the river now, crying. I looked away, getting ready to head into the direction of S and J for a split second, and I hear a loud splash. I stopped and turned around and realized the boy was gone. I looked around knowing that it's impossible for someone to move that quickly, to be gone from my sight like that in under a second. He couldn't have jumped in the river that quickly, not without me seeing, but he was just gone. I stopped for a moment, dread filling my body. I froze in fear as I looked around trying to make logic of what just happened. S came around the way and yelled at me. "What the heck, we've been calling you for about 5 minutes. Get your butt over here right now. I told you not to stray away from us." I looked at her and said, But there was a boy." My sister looked around and looked at me. "Yeah, okay, let's get going." For years I told no one this story, until a couple of years ago. I was telling my sister about the boy. Her face froze as she listened to the story. When I finished, she said, "Back in the 70s, there were 2 little boys playing ball by the river. One of the boys dropped the ball in the river and went in to get it. The river had a really strong current and dragged that boy under. His friend tried to jump in and save him, but they both drowned in the river." Although I've witnessed a lot of bizarre supernatural experiences at Knight's Ferry, this one was the one that creeped me out the most, mainly because I didn't actually hug a boy. That's the part that freaks me out so bad. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to eeriecast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.